All right, now we've got through all that solving one-step kind of boring problems. We get to start seeing some interesting ones. We're going to move on to solving two-step problems, which can look kind of messy sometimes when we're dealing with rational numbers. You're used to just seeing it with integers, and it looks like a bigger problem, but with the integers, it doesn't look as messy. Sometimes these rational numbers, like down here, the -9/4 and the +4/5 and the 7/8, they can make the problem look messy, and some of you get a little bit nervous when you start seeing fractions, but we're just gonna go through these step at a time, and we're gonna do exactly what we did with integers. We're gonna solve it the same steps, the same process. We're just gonna look at it now with these with numbers that are in different forms. Instead of integers, we've got these nice, lovely, wonderful, not scary at all fractions. All right, so step one, just like every other time, we're gonna draw our railroad tracks on each side of the equal sign. We wanna make sure we're trying to get x by itself, and we need to just make sure that we do the same thing on the left as we're doing on the right. So we're gonna put our railroad tracks there to help remind us. Now step two, a couple of things here. We're kind of condensing the notes, trying to save you some space. If we need to simplify, meaning if there's any like terms that we can combine, or if there's any double signs that we need to get rid of, or if there's any distribution that we need to do that first. Get all of that done and out of the way. In this problem, there's not. We've got x/8, which we really can't combine with anything. And then we just have a -1/2 over here, which we can't combine with this -7/2 because they're on opposite side of the equal sign. So in this problem, there's really nothing to simplify, but there may be some in the future where you have to do some of those things. So what we want to do is just circle the variable and anything attached to it. So remember, that means numbers in front of it, signs in front of it, underneath it. So in this case, x/8, that divide by 8, that over 8 part is attached to the x. This negative's not, it goes with the 1/2. We need the sign out in front. So we've got x/8 minus 1/2 equals -7/2. Now, the whole point of circling this is just to help us remember what we need to get rid of first. Okay, so step 3 says to undo all addition and subtraction first. We want to get rid of what's on the outside of the circle. So out here to the side, I'm going to put outside the circle. The only reason we're circling this is to remind us we can't get rid of that yet. We've got to get rid of everything else first, which is usually addition and subtraction. So the opposite of minusing 1/2 is to add 1/2, but I've got to do it to both sides. So this goes away, and I'm left with my x/8. Some of you forget that we're left with whatever's in the circle. We need to bring that whole thing down. x/8 is equal to -7/2 plus 1/2 is actually going to be a nice number for us. Watch what happens when we do -7/2 and we add 1/2. That's going to actually give us an integer, and we're just going to bump up to -3. So already our problem, just by getting rid of one of the numbers, looks a lot nicer. In fact, this looks like something that we did a couple of weeks ago. Right now we're dividing by 8, and the opposite of dividing by 8 is to multiply by 8 to make those go away, but I've got to do it to this side. So x is equal to -3 times 8, and negative times a positive is a negative. 3 times 8 is 24. So I think that x is equal to -24. We think that's the answer, and we are going to double check it here in a few minutes, but we're kind of moving ahead of ourselves. We're kind of skipping some of these notes. So that's the process that we're going through. Let's make sure that we have the notes to kind of match it. We got rid of the addition and the subtraction, and we're left with the x/8, which is our division and multiplication that we want to get rid of. So after we remove addition and subtraction, we're going to undo all multiplication, and we're going to undo all the divisions. And just remember that we're changing the operation, not the sign, when we do that. So if you have a -3 that's being multiplied, we don't divide by a +3, we divide by the -3. So keep that in mind. And then the last step was what we already did. We solve for the variable. We leave the fractions as improper fractions. We like those kind of numbers. And then we are sure to make sure we check our solution. Sure to make sure, is that even a sentence? It's why I teach math. Okay, so let's plug this in. Let's do that last step. We worked through that really quick. We got the notes written down here. If you need to pause the video to write all that in, go for it. But let's check this answer. Let's plug it in up here. And I'm just going to plug it in on my calculator. I've got x over 8, and I think x is negative 24. So I'm going to make a fraction, negative 24 on top, 8 on the bottom, and then I'm minusing a half. So I'm going to minus 1/2 and see what I get. I get negative 7/2, which is what I wanted, so I feel good about my work. We'll go ahead and box it in. And that's it, exactly like what you did with integers, just now you're doing it with rational numbers. And again, I know some of you get nervous about them, but if you just follow the same steps that you did before, now this is kind of like a review. This is going over it for the second time now. So let's try a few of these. We've got number 1, negative 9/4 x plus 4/5 equals 7/8. I'm going to draw my railroad tracks. I'm going to circle my variable and anything attached to it, which is a 9/4 and a negative out in front. So I know that if it's in the circle, I have to get rid of everything else first. I've got to get rid of this plus 4/5. And I do that by minusing 4/5. And I got to remember to do that to both sides. Okay, so on this side, that'll go away. And I'm just left with my negative 9/4 x. And that's equal to 7/8 minus 4/5. Which is 3 over 40, 3/40. All right, so we end up with 3/40. Now that the addition and subtraction are gone, I can get rid of this. I've got negative 9/4 times x. And here's where you go back to yesterday and you think the opposite of multiplying is to divide. So I could divide by a negative 9/4. I don't like doing that. Dividing by fractions is messy and ugly. So instead of dividing by negative 9/4, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of that, which is a negative. The 4 moves to the top and the 9 moves to the bottom. Because when I multiply those two things, they're going to go away. So on this side, I'm also going to multiply by a negative 4/9. So I've got 3 over 40, and I'm multiplying that by a negative 4/9. And I'm hoping that I get negative 1/30, which is my answer, right? Excuse me, got a little distracted by my window. Solving this, we're getting everything away from our x, so we're left with x, and that's going to equal negative 1/30. So we think that x is negative 1/30. And now I want to plug that into my problem and see if I end up doing all this math and getting 7/8. So we're going to save us some time and paper, and we're just going to plug it in. Okay, so we've got negative 1/30 instead of x, so I've got negative 9/4, and that's being multiplied by x, which is negative 1/30, I think, and then I've got to add 4/5. And when I hit enter, I get 7/8, which is what I wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and box this in, and I feel pretty comfortable with that. I feel like I've got the right answer. Okay, all right, let's move on to number 2, railroad tracks. I'm going to circle my variable and the 1.3 that's attached to it. And I've got this minus 0.03, and I need to do the opposite. So I need to add 0.03 to both sides, because that's the opposite of minusing. So these will go away. I'm left with 1.3n equaling negative 9, and I'm adding 0.03, which just gives me negative 8.97. So now I've got to get rid of this division, or sorry, this multiplication. I've got 1.3 times n. We want to divide by 1.3, divide by 1.3, and this will go away, and I'm just left with a nice n. And then I've got to put this number back in, negative 8.97, and I'm going to divide that by 1.3. And I get negative 6.9, which I think is the answer. I think that n is equal to negative 6.9, but I don't know for sure until I plug it in up here. So let's plug that in. 1.3 times n, which I think is negative 6.9, and then I'm going to minus 0.03. And I'm hoping that I end up with a negative 9, which I do. So I feel good about that. I think I did the work correctly. and we'll move on to the next problem. Railroad tracks. Circle my variable. Ooh, and it's got a lot attached to it. It has a negative sign out front. It has a 7/9 out front. All of that's attached to my x, which means I can't get rid of it yet. I've got to get rid of this one first. So let's add 5/11 to the left and add 5/11 to the right to make those go away. So I'm just left over with negative 7/9 x, and that's going to equal 2/9 plus 5/11. So in my calculator, I'm going to put 2/9 plus 5/11, and we'll see what we get. We get 67 over 99, which looks like a really big 67 over 99. That looks like a really big, ugly fraction. But you know what? In the real world, we don't get nice fractions very often. We get ugly fractions all the time. So let's keep going. Let's see, make sure we did this right at the end. I'm multiplying by negative 7/9 right now. X is being multiplied by it. I want to do the opposite of that, and we'll do it the other way this time. We'll divide by a negative 7/9 because that's the opposite of multiplying. So instead of doing the reciprocal, we'll divide this time just so we kind of try it a couple of different ways. So I'm going to divide by a negative 7/9 because that's the opposite of multiplying by it. So I take that big ugly fraction and I want to divide that by a negative 7/9. And I end up with negative 67 over 77. So x is equal to negative 67 over 77. We think. Again, that's a kind of a unique fraction. It's not a very nice number, but let's go ahead and plug it in up here and let's see what we get. See if we have the right answer. So going back to my original equation, I've got negative 5/11 in front, and then I'm minusing 7/9 multiplied by x. And I think x is negative 67 over 77. So I've got negative 5/11 minus 7/9 times negative 67 over 77. When I hit enter, I get 2/9, which I'm glad I got, because for a minute there, you know, those fractions, they looked a little bit ugly. They didn't look very nice, but we're good. We've got the right answer. We checked our work. We can feel comfortable that even though it's not a nice number, it's the answer that we're looking for. All right. So you've got a couple problems down here on your own I want you to try. You've got 2 steps here. That one won't be too bad because you're just dividing by a decimal. And again, right here, this kind of turns into a nice problem in the end and all the way across. So give these problems a try and do the best that you can. Come show me your work. Make sure that you show the process. You're not just writing numbers down there for your answers. All right, good luck.